The purpose of this lesson is to learn what forms are, how to create a form on a web page, how to use text boxes, buttons, checkboxes, radio buttons, and hidden elements on your form, some new features introduced in HTML5, the difference between client-side and server-side processing, how to collect data from your website and send it to the web server, and the difference between get and post methods. For this lesson, I have created a new document called forms.html, which is just simply a copy of my template.html file. I have modified the title to be forms, and also the header h1 is also forms. And I have also added a link to this to our index.html file, as you can see here. So here's my new document. It is called Forms, and it just simply takes me to a blank page. I'm going to use this page to create some forms that we can use to collect data from the user to send to the server. You likely have used forms before when you have to go to a website where you have to fill in information such as your name, telephone number, email address, maybe even leave a message, select some stuff from a box that's asking you for information, yes or no, things of that nature. That type of structure is called a form, and a form is a standard HTML element. Now, every form starts with a form tag and ends with a closing form tag. For the purpose of being able to manipulate my form with things like JavaScript and CSS, I need to give every form a name. So I'm going to name my form equal to something, and this form is going to be a contact us form. So I'm going to call it contact us, and this will be for JavaScript. For CSS, I need to give it an ID, and now typically we will make the ID and name equal to the same thing. Like I said, the name is typically used for the JavaScript, and ID is typically used for CSS. A form also has a couple of other elements. It has to have what is called a method, and this is going to be the method that is used to collect the information from the user and send it to the server. And there are two different types that you can use. There is a get and a post. And I will show you through this lesson what the difference between the two of those are. There are some times when a get will be preferable, and there are other times when a post will be preferable, and we will talk about those as we go along. The next thing that we need to do is we need to have some sort of action that is going to be performed when the user clicks the submit button at the bottom of our form. Now, the action is going to be equal to the name of the file that is going to receive the input from this. So in this case, I have created a folder called scripts, and I put a PHP file, which is a server-side script file, in that document, or I'm sorry, in that folder called demo.php. So what will happen with this is I'm telling it, use the get method to send whatever is typed into this form to the server to this scripts/demo.php file. I need to clarify that this demo.php file that I'm going to be referencing is one that I created just for the purpose of this class. The actual creation of PHP files and server-side scripting is outside of the scope of this class. You can find other classes that pertain to the actual creation of those files. What I'm going to create is a contact us form, but we're actually going to implement some features that would be in multiple forms. The different types of inputs that we have would actually make a difference as to what type of form you would use them on, but for the purpose of this lesson, I'm going to include all of the different types, or I should say most of the different types within this one document. Okay, so our first type of input that I want to put in here is for the user's first name. So I'm actually going to type text that says first name, And then to actually ask them for their name, I'm going to use an input tag. Okay, so the type of input is equal to text. And I'm going to give it a name, and its name is going to be first name with no space, and also an ID. And once again, this is for JavaScript and for CSS. These will both have the same name to them, so this would be first name. And then now when I save and refresh my page, you will see that I now get a item that has the first name and a text box where I can type information in. Okay, so I want the user then to type their last name. So it's another input, type equals text, name is equal to last name, and ID is equal to last name. Now what you'll notice when I refresh the page over here is they are both put on the same line. Remember, HTML ignores white space. So if I don't specify how to break these up, HTML won't know what to do with it, and it will just simply put them on one line. Okay, so I have a couple of ways that I could handle this. The first one would be to put this inside of a paragraph tag and close my paragraph tag. The other option would be to simply do a line break, and a line break just looks like BR space / and then close. This is a self-closing tag, so it's a line break, and it's self-closing, so you have the / at the end. Now we get something like this. I'm going to show you how to style this better in a little bit. We can use CSS to actually style it and make it look prettier, but for now this is what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to ask the user to select a username. So the name here is going to be username, and the ID is username. And after they type in their username, the next thing that I want them to do is to select a password. Okay, so password. And remember, the item on the left here that I'm typing where it says password, that is just simply a prompt for the user to know what to type. Okay, now this one's going to be different. The input type is going to be password. And the name, I can call it password, but the problem is password is a reserved word. So instead of calling it password, I'm just simply going to call it PWD. And then its ID is also PWD. Okay, so I want to show you how these work. Refresh the page. I have first name is Tom. I have Jones. He wants to select the username of Tom Jones. And his password, he wants it to be password. And if you notice, it actually hides the password behind these bullet points. And if I click in here, this is Internet Explorer, it will allow me to see what the password is. Because I specified that the type for this field is a password, it will automatically hide the input. So now that we've asked the person for their name, their username, and a password, we need to give them some sort of means to actually submit it. So I'm going to create another input type here, and the input is type equals submit. Now, if I just simply do this, what it will do is it will give me a submit query button over here. And I want a line break here, so. Okay, so I had this submit query, but I don't want it to say submit query because most people don't know what a query is. So what I can do is I can say that value is equal to submit. And so now what I'm doing is specifying what the text should be in that box. I have one more that I can play with. The other one is going to be input type equals reset. And this is going to be a reset button, so its value is going to be reset. And what this does is, let's say I type in Tom Jones password, and I didn't mean to type all of that. I can click reset, and it will clear out all of the entries that are in that form. I'm going to keep entering some other information. So I want to ask the user if they are a new user or if they're an existing user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an input type of radio. And what a radio button is a collection of little bulleted buttons that I can select, and I can only choose one at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a name, and I'm going to call it is new member. And so the question is, are they a new member? So yes or no. Okay, so I'm also going to give it an ID, just like I've done everything else. Okay, and now what text do I want to go by this? So I'm going to say yes, and then a line break. And then I'm going to have another one, which is input type equals radio name equals, and now it's going to be the same thing as I had before, except I need to choose if it's yes or no. All right, so I'm going to say is new member again, and its ID is new member, and this one is going to be no. Okay, so I need some sort of way to differentiate to the system which one of these is which. And the way that I do this is I am going to give these a value. So for the value for yes, the value is going to be equal to yes. So if they check this, then the value for is new member will be yes. This one here, I'm going to make the value equal to no. So if they choose this one, then the value for are they a new member is no. Okay, so I'm going to type in here, are you a new member? Refresh. And now I get something like this. So now we have the first name, last name, username, password. Are you a new member? Yes or no. And if I select yes, I get yes. If I select no, notice it changes. I can only have one of these selected at a time. This is a radio button. Okay, so I want to set one of these so that it is the default. And so I'm going to specify that yes, you're a new member. And the way that I do that, where I make it automatically default to yes, is I just simply add the word checked at the end of the input type declaration here. And you will notice that if I refresh the page, yes is the default. It will come up every time, whereas by not having it checked before, every time I refresh the page, nothing was selected. The next type, which is similar to the radio buttons, is what is called a checkbox. Now the difference between a radio button and a checkbox, a radio button, only one item in the collection can be selected. In a checkbox, I can have no items, one item, or more than one items checked, and any of those are okay. So I'm going to ask, do you have any of these pets? Okay, remember, I'm making line breaks, which is not the way that we really want to do this. I will show you better ways to do this later. So do you have any of these pets? Okay, so the first one is going to be a dog, and so I'm going to make an input type equal to checkbox. Name equals, let's call it just pet, and the value is going to be equal to dog. Okay, and then my next input type equals checkbox. The name is still equal to pet, and the value is equal to cat. Okay, now I just realized I forgot to put in my ID, so I'm also going to say ID equals pet, and ID equals pet. Okay, so that way I can designate these as I go down through. All right, so now if I refresh my page, I now get checkboxes that I can select the dog, I can select the cat, I can unselect the dog, unselect the cat. Any combination of these will work. So the difference is a radio button, only one of them can be selected. A checkbox, all of them, none of them, or any combination between can be selected. Now I've asked the user for their first name and their last name and a username, but I have not asked them for the email address, so I'm going to put that here. Okay, this input type is going to be text. The name is equal to email, and the ID is equal to email. Okay, so what this does is this one will ask them for their email address. Now the thing is I want to start specifying some things that have to be filled out on the page to be allowed to submit it. Before HTML5, you would have to implement JavaScript on your page to make sure that what they enter for the first name looks like a first name, what they enter for the last name looks like a last name. What they enter for an email address has to be a text string and then an @, then some more text string, then a .com, .gov, or anything like that. And we would actually have to make a JavaScript that would go through and check to make sure that that data was valid. In HTML5, there's an easier way to do it, which is just simply state inside of these a new attribute called required, and we're going to set this to required. And what this does is it will force these fields to be filled out before they can be submitted. Now there are some limitations to this. It requires the user to be using an HTML5 compliant browser. So they're going to be using a newer version of Internet Explorer. They're going to be using Firefox, Chrome, but something that is fully HTML and CSS compliant. All right, so when I save this and refresh, I won't see anything looking different here, but what will happen is when I hover over this, you'll see a little box that pops up that says this is a required field. Now, some browsers will actually go so far as to automatically validating the data to make sure that it really looks like email, and it would know that because I put the name as email. That is just strictly up to some browsers. They don't all support it, but the ones that do will make it easier for you to try to get your form validated to make sure the user is inputting valid data. Sometimes we want to force values to be in our fields for our form without actually asking the user for that data. We also have another input type called a hidden type. So I'm going to create another input and set its type equals to hidden. And let's say for the purpose of this form, we want to know what their language is. So I'm going to set the name of this to language, which is also going to be its ID is lang. And we will set a value, and the value for this one is going to be EN for English. Now the purpose of this is that it does not show up on the page. So if I refresh over here, I don't see that field. But what it does is it actually puts it in as one of the form elements, which means when I submit the form, this data will still get transmitted to the server. It is hidden from the user to see it, but there's nothing to prevent them from right-clicking, viewing the source, and finding this information. So make sure you don't use it for things like hidden passwords or anything like that, because the user still has access to it. Another common type of input that we will see on a form is what is called a text area. And a text area is a little bit different in that it actually has a beginning and an ending tag. Okay, so my text area is going to have a name, and in this case I want to make this a text box for the user to enter comments. So I'm going to call it comments, and its ID is also comments. And a text area has a specific width and a specific height, and its width is measured in columns, so meaning how many characters wide can it be, and then it's measured in height in terms of rows, so how many rows tall is it. So I'm going to state that the calls is equal to 40, and it's going to be 3 rows tall. So I'm going to say rows equals 3. Okay, then what I put is what do I want to have pre-populated. So I'm going to say enter comments here, and then I close this. Okay, so now what I will get when I refresh is a box that looks like this. Now notice I did not do a line break, so it shoved the submit and reset over there. So now we have this. Okay, so now the enter comments here is what gets pre-populated. And you notice when I click in here, that does not automatically go away. If I want it to automatically go away, I'm going to have to use JavaScript or some other method that when I click in here, that will go away. So if I don't want the user to have to remove this, then what I will do is leave this blank and put the text right above it. So I do have other means to put it where they know what they're supposed to put in the box, but not make it where they have to remove the data. The next one is called a select element. And so this one is also similar to text array in that we have a beginning and an ending. And so my select is going to be some amount of size. So meaning how many rows tall is it? So in this case, it's going to be 1 row tall. I'm going to give it a name of sports. So what kind of sports do you like? Its ID is also going to be sports. And then it also has a close. Okay, so this works kind of like an unordered list. In an unordered list, we specified a UL, and the UL had a beginning and an end. And then inside of it, we specified our line items, our LIs. Well, in here, it's a select, and the select statement contains options. So our options are going to be something like football, and then baseball, another option of soccer, and then our last one is going to be basketball. Okay, so when I refresh here, actually I'm going to put a line break so it looks nicer. Still not pretty, but nicer. I missed an apostrophe here, or sorry, set of quotation marks. So I need to add that, and then when I refresh over here, now I will have a drop-down list that has items in it. Now what we'll notice here is that it automatically defaults to football, and I don't necessarily want it to do that. So what I'm going to do for the first option is something like a non-breaking space. And what that will do is it will force it that when they come to this, they actually have to click and then select. So I could, instead of a non-breaking space, I could say something like select item. I could put whatever I want in here, and that will show up for my top item. Unfortunately, that top one is still a choice that they can select. So if they don't select one of these other ones from here and then click submit, select item will actually be the value for this field. In the last video, we talked about accessibility in tables and how a screen reader will go down through the page and will read certain values. We want to make this accessible. So we want to make it where somebody that has a screen reader will be able to tell what is on the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to encase this first name and the input in what is called a label. Okay, so I'm going to put a label here, and then at the end of it, I'm going to close my label. And if I do this for each of my elements, now what I am doing is I'm making it where when somebody comes in with a screen reader, the screen reader will say first name, and then wait for their input. Last name, wait for their input. And if I do this for all of these fields, we are now making our web page more accessible. The problem with doing this, though, is that by encasing this whole thing inside of this label, I am forcing the first name and the input to be side by side. And I don't necessarily want to have to do that because I may want these to be spread out a little bit on the page. I might have another element that goes in between here that I don't want to be part of the label. So there is a newer way to do this with HTML5, which is to not enclose both the label and the input, but to enclose just strictly the label. Now the catch to this is going to be that I have to tell the screen reader what this label belongs to. Well, this label first name belongs to the ID of first name. So what I am going to say is label for, and then it's equal to first name. And then do the same thing with this one. So I'm going to remove the close of the label from here, place it here, and now this is label for equals last name. This does the exact same thing as I had before by enclosing all of the label and the input into the label, but now it allows me to use CSS to format them differently, and it also will allow them to not necessarily be side by side, but still have the label show up properly on a screen reader. I want to start making this look a little bit better, and if you notice, I have some logical groups over here. I have the first name, last name, and email address. Those are contact information for the person. Then we have username and password for the person, and then we have personal information here, and then we have comments down below. What I want to do is I want to break this up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the section that includes from their first name all the way down through their email, and what I want to do with that is I want to put that inside of another label called a field set. Okay, so I have my field set, and it has a beginning and an ending. And what my field set will do is just simply draw a box around all of these to join them together. It's just a way of making them look nicer. Okay, so now what I need though is I need a legend to state what exactly it is within this section. So I'm going to call this contact information. And when I save and refresh, now I get a little box that's around it. You can see it, it's real light. But what it has done is it's breaking this up so I can say, okay, the stuff inside of here is contact information. Okay, and then my next one is going to do with the username and the password. Okay, so I'm going to give this a name of, or legend of select a username and password. Okay, so now what they can do is they can look at this and say, okay, well, this is contact information, this is select a username and password, and it just simply logically organizes the things in my field. I'm sorry, in my form. Because this field set is its own tag and it is its own container element, I can style this thing with CSS. So I could actually state style equals, and then I can specify things like I want to set the width for this section to be 500 pixels. And I want to have a border that is 2 pixels solid red. Once again, don't use definite colors. You want to use hexadecimal colors, but for the purpose of this, I want to show it to you. So now when I refresh, you will see this section now has a red border around it, and it is only 500 pixels wide. It's just a way to make it look a little bit better. I can do some other things with it. I can set the font family to Arial, and if I don't have Arial installed, a sans serif font would work. And now all of the stuff that is inside of there is that specific font. So what I'm doing is I'm using a field set to break up my form a little bit to make it where I can figure out as a user, I need to do this section, then I need to do this section, but I can also change some styles with it because it is its own container object. I told you before that by putting these line breaks in here, I'm not necessarily formatting my page. I'm not making it look very nice. Things are kind of messy because they're not lining up quite right. So what I'm going to do is I want to introduce some style elements to my page. Okay, so the first thing that I want to play with is setting the style of the form itself. So I'm going to specify my form. And my form is going to have a background color. And we'll just make it a kind of light color. I want all of the elements in my form to have the font family of Arial, and if that doesn't work, then sans serif would work. The entire form is going to have a width of 400 pixels. And I want to have some padding. So from the inside of my form to the beginning of where the elements are, I want to have a little bit of space from that outside area. Okay, so if I refresh my page, I will see that I now get this. Now what happened though is my field set, because I specified a width for it, my field set will actually go beyond the bounds of the form itself. So I want to fix that. So I'm going to come down here and remove my width from my field set. And now it actually remains inside of its container. Okay, so I want to do some other things. I want to make these labels appear on the left side, and I would like to get these boxes so that they're nice and lined up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to format these labels. Now I know that these things are labels because I've put them inside of a label field. Okay, so I'm going to start adding labels for my other elements now. So label 4 equals, and this one is email. And what I want to do is I want to get these to line up so that they look nice. All right, so I'm going to come up here to my CSS where I can add some CSS elements to format it the way that I want it. So I know that these are labels over here on the side, and I know they're labels because I put them in labels. So that means I can manipulate the label element. So anything that has a label element will be formatted a certain way. Okay, so what I want to do before I do this is I'm going to come down here and actually remove my BRs after each of these inputs. Okay, so now if I refresh the page over here, I just get a little jumbled mess of these. Remember, it puts them all on one line and ignores white space. So what I want to do is I want to start doing some stuff that will force my labels to show up on the left side of the inputs, and I want them to all appear on their own line. So I'm going to show this to you one line at a time. I'm going to set my float to left, and what this will do is it will force anything that is in a label to float to the left of the other elements that are in this field set. Okay, so if I refresh the page, now I get all of my labels appear on the left, but they're not necessarily with the fields that they belong with. Okay, so the next one that I'm going to do is I want to force, after each label, I want it to force it to do a line break. So I'm going to clear the left side. And when I refresh, now I get something like this. And it looks back like it did when I had my line breaks. Okay, so I want to be able to manipulate the width of my labels. And right now, the labels are just simply text, which means I can't really specify a width for them. But I want to trick it into thinking that my labels are a block level element where I can actually specify the width. So I'm going to use the display and set this to block. Now, if I do this, no difference. But what it actually just did is it allows me now to set the width of where these labels are. And when I refresh, now I get this, and you will see that these lines all line up nicely. Okay, so I'm going to play with a couple of other things. I want to take the text and I want to move it over to the right a little bit. I want them to be aligned close to the boxes. So I'm going to text align right. And when I do that, it puts the text over here to the right side of its container element. So remember, by making these a display block, it's treating this as a rectangle. That is where I can actually put my text and I can manipulate it in there. Okay, but they're tight against the inputs. I want to move them over a little bit so I can play with padding. And so we'll set that to 10 pixels, and that will move them to the left 10 pixels. Okay, so then the next thing that I want to play with is I don't like how close all of my labels are together. So I'm going to increase the margin on the top of each of these to 10 pixels. Okay, so now what I've done is I've caused each of these to be spaced out a little bit, but you will notice that my inputs are not. I want to cause my inputs, all of my different types of inputs, and my text area to have the same margin at the top as I just gave to my labels. Okay, so what I can do is I can apply this to the inputs and also to the text areas. So anything that is an input or a text area will get these styles. And remember from the last one we did this with the TDs and the THs where I wanted to apply the same formatting to those at the same time. I just simply specify all the different types of elements that should get this format. Okay, so these are going to get a margin top of 10 pixels. The problem is the same thing as my text. These are actually inline elements, and I don't want them to be inline elements. I want them to be block level elements, so I'm going to display them as a block element. Now when I refresh, now they all get spaced out. And so what you will notice is I now have first name and then a little space, my input, and so forth. Okay, now I still have left my line breaks in the rest of these, so I need to remove my other line breaks. So if I come down here and remove all of these, just a few of them. Okay, so now if I come back over and refresh, I guess something looks a little bit nicer. So now I have my yes and no, my dog and cat, and so what I need to do is I need to apply labels. So I need to specify that this is a label, and then what I can do with that is once these are labels, they will inherit the same characteristics as the ones up here. Same thing with this username. I need to specify that as a label. When I do, it'll push it to the side. So my form will now take input, and I can put in my first name, last name, email, username, and all that information. And when I'm done, I click submit. Now on my action, I specified my action as being scripts/demo.php. Now on my local computer, if I click on submit, actually it's telling me these are required fields, so I have to have a name here. Let me type in a name for you. Okay, so now I'm going to submit this, and what you will notice is that I didn't actually get what I expected. What I ended up getting was the contents of my PHP file, and the reason for it is that my PHP file has to be on the server to run or on a computer that has a PHP preprocessor installed. So I can't try this form out on my local computer. I have to upload it to the server first. So to do that, we are going to use FileZilla. We will upload it to the server, and then we can try it from there. All right, so I'm in FileZilla, and I'm connected to the server. The left side is my local computer, and the right side is the remote computer, so that's going to be the server. What I need to do is I need to make sure that I copy my forms file over to the server, and there's already a copy there, so I'm going to overwrite it. And now what I'm doing is I'm going to run that file from the server instead of from my local computer. All right, so this is my website on the server itself. I'm going to go to Forms and refresh because I had an old copy. All right, so this is a required field, so I need to fill this out. This was Tom Jones. His email address is tom.jones tom.jones@example.com. He wants tom.jones for his username. He wants it to be password. And the rest of this stuff, let's see, he is a new member. He has a dog. And he'd like to say hello. And he likes football. Okay, so I'm going to submit this, and remember my form is just simply a way for me to get the files or the information from my computer up to the server. So when I submit this, the action is going to be to send it to that demo.php file. So when I submit this, the PHP file is saying your information has been received. Okay, so this is actually a PHP form that received it and did something with it. So maybe it sent it as an email. But what I want to show to you is that there is a difference between the get method and the post method. And what you will notice is that my file name is course.universalclass.com/html/scripts/demo.php, and then there's a question mark right here. And that question mark right there is actually going to specify some variables that are following after this. So you'll notice the last name is here, the first name is there, the email is here. All that information is being sent in plain text, all of it. So I don't want that to happen. The way that I'm going to fix this is instead of using a get method, I'm going to use a post method. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my previous form. And I'm going to modify my file just a little bit. And the way that I'm going to modify it is by doing a post instead. So save this, upload it to the server, overwrite the existing one, and then refresh my page. Okay, so this is the refreshed page, and if I check the source, I will see in the source that my method is now post, which is what I want. Okay, so this time I'm going to fill out this information. He does have a dog, he has a cat, he'd still like to say hello, and he enjoys football. So when I submit this, it will still call the same PHP file, but the difference is going to be this time that now the URL at the top does not list the question mark, and none of the variables are sent in the URL. What that means is all of those variables that were there before still got sent to the server, but this time they got sent as part of the body of the packets. They are now hidden, and nobody else will see it. It will not show up in my history. Somebody will see that I went to demo.php, but they will not see all of the things that I typed in the form. So if I want it to show all the variables, then I'm going to do a get. If I don't want it to show the variables, then I do a post. In this lesson, you learned how to create a form on a web page, how to use text boxes, buttons, checkboxes, radio buttons, and hidden elements, some new features in HTML5 such as the required attribute, how to format the form by using CSS, the difference between client-side and server-side processing, how to collect data and send it to the web server by using a form, and the difference between a get and a post method.